p.m. Wednesday, January the 12th, 2022, City Hall Conference. Call this meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Madam Clerk, will you please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Discussion items. Number one, discussion, direction, and possible action. PSPRS pension obligation bonds.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. After staff had quite a lengthy discussion, Mr. Massey, myself, Gene, Mr. Michael Vasquez, and Pat Walker, who are all present, we decided that we needed to get direction from council on the issue of public safety pension obligation bonds, and that that decision needed to come sooner rather than later. And so we knew you would all be here today, and so we put this item on, and I have Gene here that can, and Mr. Vasquez and Pat, that can do a presentation and make their recommendations along with staffs. We concurred jointly that our best option at this point was to go ahead and move forward with looking at pension obligation bonds. And with that, I'll turn it over to Gene or Michael or whoever's going to take it. And I hope I said that right, Michael.
Thank you. May I drop this, or you can hear me fine? Sounds like. Okay. Excellent. So just to reiterate what you had said, after the last council session, Mr. Kissinger and Mr. Massey, we discussed the options a little bit more, and we understood that council, was interested but wanted a little bit more direction. So we discussed some options amongst the many of options, and between city staff, Ms. Walker, Ms. Molman, we believe that the best course of action at this right now would be to issue approximately $16 million in bonds to approximately fund 50% of the city's UAL, which is a combination of both the police and fire. We also discussed the option of using some of the city's savings account, their reserve, to also reduce the UAL. But based on, many of the things we discussed, we believe it is best to keep on hand the city's reserves at this time until the city can get a better read as to where the market's going, and making sure that that approximate $4 million they would commit in reserves would actually do what it's supposed to and reduce the UAL.
So, Mr. Mayor, if we hear from council that the council wants to move forward with pension bonds, Michael will immediately, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but I think the plan would be bringing back the final resolution for your approval, and hopefully in the February meeting.
That would be the plan, right. Yes, sir.
But what we're seeking today is your direction to move forward, to seek those pension bonds and get it going for your approval of the resolution. But
Mr. Kissinger and Mr. Massey, I think I want to be clear, this is not an official action, right, as if we had in a resolution. This is more direction than anything.
Positive direction.
Excellent.
On
Thank
what
you,
exactly to do from now to February is what we're seeking.
So, Mayor, just to be clear, and I think that's what Mr. Vasquez was making sure, what we're asking for today is direction to staff. Staff prepares the documents. The documents are going to be presented to council, mayor and council at the next meeting. And at that point, that's when the city commits to going forward and issuing $16 million in debt. But that's the documentation that will be prepared. And all the other, we're going to try to tie up all the loose ends between now and February so that when that resolution comes before you, we'll be ready to go.
Yes,
Right?
sir.
But we're also going to be watching the market, right?
Yes, sir.
And if interest rates start going, there's got to be a point at which the interest rates are too high and it doesn't make this viable anymore. Is that correct, Mr.?
Yes, sir. So if I could liken this, and this is the only part of this transaction that's like a refunding. When we would do a refunding that we've done for the city in the past, let's say 5-6 years, the multiple refundings, we've always more or less stated, hey, the market is favorable right now. There are savings if we were to do a refinancing right now. But in the event rates were to increase to the point where there were not savings to the city or a level of savings to the city, then it wouldn't make sense to proceed. It would be very similar to that here. Clearly, we're looking for savings, so if rates were to go up to 5%, then there's would probably have to be a serious pumping of the brakes.
So are you able to tell us what the rates will be right now? Or is that something that you can only tell as we're really on the precipice of issuing the bonds?
Yes, sir. We are on the precipice of issuing. Rates are moving. So I would like a little time to just, get the ground underneath my feet before I start giving indicatives.
Go ahead.
Mr. Vasquez, Councilman Maldonado. When we come back in February, so you're going to bring, options, risk, terms of what are the best, reasonable direction to go?
Yes, sir. So with regards to options, I think we're pretty honed in to what we're doing because we had a few options and, how much are we going to issue? How much are we going to contribute from the city's general fund? I think right now I'm getting a pretty strong indication from the financing team, city staff, that we're looking at $16 million with regards to the issuance of bonds. And then I don't know that there's really too much after that with regards to options. But to finish the second part of your question, yes, sir. Come February, I would be able to give you a little bit better indication as to what rates are looking like and what that means with regards to savings, potential savings.
What about tying up that money or risk? What it integrates for the city? Having that $60 million.
Well, sir, that's the difficulty.
Would you give us terms? Better to keep him in, for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or.
See, sir, that's the most difficult part about this transaction is that in previous transactions that I've done for you, it's been a fixed rate financing to a fixed rate refinancing. Here, there is nothing fixed with PSPRS. That's the difficulty. So as I've said from the beginning, the easiest part of this is my job, issuing bonds. What happens after that is really up to the market, up to chance, and how well either PSPRS or a 115 trust would invest your money. So unfortunately, council member, I cannot give you guarantees.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Hi, Michael.
Yes, ma'am. Very nice to see you.
I'm not an expert in this area, but I've done a little bit of research. And I think as a council member, I have a responsibility to do some research.
Absolutely.
Into this,
Thank you for that.
PSP, yeah. And it's a huge elephant in the room, and it has been for many, many, many years historically. So let me ask you just very in a simple way, how do we plan to pay that $16 million debt? So you're going to borrow let me look, let me think here. You're gonna borrow $33 million in, $33 million in unfunded liability, right? And you-
16, ma'am.
How much?
1616?
I'm sorry, Mayor.
No, no, no.
Yes, I think, Councilwoman, you said two things, so that I think that's confusing. We have a present value of $33 million in debt, but what we're contemplating is borrowing $16 million. So we're basically doing half. We're going half in on this bet, if you look at it from that perspective.
So the $16 million, how does the city plan to pay for that in the future? How are we going to pay
Should-
for the $16 million that we are going to get in bonds?
Councilmember Pat Walker, we're going to be having savings from the PSPRS because of the fact we're going to invest the money, make more than what it's going to cost us on the bonds. So therefore, that payment is going to be made for by the savings that we're going to generate. And that's why we give you a net future value savings of $6 million when we say we're going to sell $16 million, but we're going to be able, and that's including paying back the principal and the bonds. So we're going to pay it back from the savings that we get.
I'm sorry, I thought the question was more related to what source of funds from the city or
The city are we going to, when we pay?
It'll be the
that-
general fund.
It's from the general fund. And in your opinion, are we okay using general fund monies to pay for that $16 million
Well,
debt?
Mayor and members of the council, again, we did a 10-year forecast.
Yeah, I
And in it,
saw
we did a
that.
pessimistic,
A
and we did a baseline. The pessimistic is why I'm saying don't take the $4 million yet and get rid of it. We know you got about $14 million in there. We've got a good cushion. At some point, if that happens, the pessimistic one happens, you're going to have to look at a new revenue source anyway. And I don't know what that will be, but you'll have to look at that at that time. That's a few years out, though, but it buys you some time. But you're asking, again, the risk factor. If everything comes true that we said, and the market is the way it is, and we can make the savings we need to make, and the market doesn't crash and cause it, we just want to give you a warning that we have no control over that. So to say, well, can we do it? Based on our projections that we have now, yes. Based on the assumptions we've used, yes, I think we can. It's showing that we're going to have enough savings to pay for it. That's the numbers Michael ran.
And
And GovInvest, I'm sorry.
so on the pessimistic forecast, I looked at it here, and it goes in a negative, negative, negative. Can you tell me a little bit about
Let me get my glasses.
that? That's kind of concerning, because if you look at FY 32,
Yeah, it's, Mayor and members of the council, the reason it goes, and let me get to that page.
yeah, it's, it's right here.
Where am I missing it? No, it's not in here.
It's right here.
Yeah. This is, was on the Rounds Consulting
Yeah.
presentation. That's why I didn't have it. Okay. So the thing about this is this also is not containing any contingency reserve in this. But because of the fact that you're going to be realizing if you use my glasses keep fogging up, so I'm going to take that down. If you do pay off the PSPRS with the ARPA funds like we had planned in the budget, then you're going to have savings for next year that we're going to roll into the fund balance. So even though if you have some negatives, you can buy some time and pay for it by the savings account. Now, is that permanent? That's what I call a structural deficit. But that's what contingency reserves are for, to buy you time to fix it on a permanent basis. So, yeah, it's concerning if this is the worst-case scenario. If revenues
Can be.
drop, sure, it can be anywhere in between. It could be the baseline forecast. We don't know. That's why there's so many economists and forecasters and things, because they all have different opinions of where it's going to be. But that's why we wanted to be as conservative as possible to show you, here's what we think is going to happen, but if things really start to get bad, we think this is what could happen. But even with the worst-case scenario, we're saying that we think we have enough savings to buy some time. You may have to look at sales taxes. You may have to do that.
Well, yeah, that's another.
Either way, you owe
So the-
PSPRS, though. See, and that's the key.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to get out of the debt no matter what you do.
Yeah, but we could reduce it. And that's what
That's what we're talking about doing.
Yeah.
Potentially.
You know, and we believe that there's a strong case for that. We're not just saying randomly, just do it. But again, it seems like a little mixed message, but we're just presenting the whole case.
So the 1.3 million payment, how is that going to get paid? How are we going to plan to pay the $1.3 million payment on the debt?
Okay, because we're going to earn enough funds when we invest it. When we invest it with either a 115 trust that we talked about, or we give it to PSPRS, which we recommend going to the 115 trust, we assume you're going to make more money than what your payment is, a little bit more. So you're going to save a little bit, but you're going to be able to make your payment out of the general fund because it's going to reduce down your liability on the PSPRS.
Yeah, okay.
May I say it just a little different?
Sure.
Same thing. So, so you may or may not recall there was our history or scheduled UAL contributions from the city over a period of time that changes every year. From the most recent PSPRS and actuarial study, those payments start at approximately 1 million, and then they start increasing at an accelerated rate, to a couple million, right? So where part of where we pay for this, again, as she said, is the savings. So if we issue debt at approximately $1.2, $1.5 million a year, whatever it is, and we have a scheduled payment of 2.6 million, 2.8 million at the rear end of your scheduled payments, that's where you build your savings, and that's how you are able to pay for this by virtue of the savings.
And I think it's just clear that it's not, all assumptions being equal, we're not adding that debt to the general fund. We're going to have savings in the general fund to pay for it. So it's not additional new debt that you're adding based on the assumptions we used.
Well, like I said, I'm not an expert in this area, but I think I have an obligation to the public to make sure that, I feel confident in what we're doing. So, so will the contribution rate of 66% that the city is making, will that be reduced?
So by virtue of upfronting the UAL, yes. In a simple answer, yes.
Simple answer, yes. But how much, we can't answer that. We won't know for sure because they do the actuarial every year.
Okay, I saw the audit, yeah, which I'm sure you're working on it already, but, so, okay. So do you feel confident that the city can afford to do this as a finance consultant?
I'm as confident in the market as anybody else is probably in this room. I don't know what's going to happen. I feel that we've done our due diligence. We've worked on this for months. I think council's done an unbelievable job of asking for information more than any other client I've worked for. A lot of them just jump in and did the POBs because on the surface it sounds like, oh, wow, that's a no-brainer. We're going to save money. But we wanted to be able to show you that there are risks associated with it. So based on if all the assumptions come true, yeah, I feel comfortable with it. But I can't guarantee it. That's the problem. I wish I could.
Because one more question, a couple questions actually. On the American Relief Funds, it's not sustainable.
One more
American
time, please.
Relief Funds are not sustainable. So the last 3.2 was used, of course, for the fire and police ongoing contribution. But do you feel that because it's not sustainable, I know we're getting another 3.1 or 2, do you feel comfortable jumping into this, not having that, 3.2, it's not sustainable, we're not going to have it, we're going to have it one more time going, and we haven't decided how we're going to use that, but those monies, but, do you still feel comfortable because we used it in the past, and do you feel comfortable just jumping into this, and that the city can afford this?
Councilmember Montiel, so I don't mean to answer for you.
And it doesn't matter who answers.
But I guess based on the analysis done on your future revenues, how do I restate this? Give me 1 second, please. So, do we feel again that this is a guarantee? No. Do we feel that based on the analysis that we've done with the revenues that we can sustain payment of this over a period of time, even in a difficult time? Yes. but there are some measures that we would have to take thereafter in the event this starts to go down.
And what would be some of the measures, Mrs. Walker, that you think the city would have to take? Because the market is unpredictable. You know, we all, you know, some of us do the market, not me, but I know some people do it, and it's unpredictable. We all know that. So what are some of the things that the city would have to do?
Well, in any time you face it, whether it has anything to do with PRS or anything, and I teach this in my budget class, and I know, council member, you'll probably remember me saying this, there's only three things you can do. You can increase revenues, decrease expense, or do a combination. And so what you would do is look at, well, do we have any areas that are going to be decreased in any way? And one of the things you did during the budget time was you went ahead and bought some vehicles and not leased them. So you got a little bit of room there. You made decisions like that. The other thing is you look at revenues that can be increased or a combination. Maybe you do 0.5% on the sales tax, and that's not that much because you're one of the lowest in the whole state. I don't know if you know that. You're one of the lowest.
Yeah.
And so, you know, maybe you do that, and then you look at other expenditures. But it's a combination of those things, and that's why you try to buy yourself time. And you've got enough reserve that's what makes me feel comfortable. Yeah, you're paying PSPRS with the ARPA funds, but then that frees up one-time money that's going into the general fund that you're going to be able to use in the event that you have to bridge the gap if the pessimistic happens.
What worries me is using savings to pay, you know, the debt, if we get to
No.
that point.
You're using savings in the future. If the pessimistic happens, you're using savings to support your general fund in total, not just one line item, because we're showing the revenues don't cover the expenditures. You're having to dip into your savings account. And that's not unusual for a city to have it before they go. If you never, ever, ever, ever use your contingency reserve, well, I don't ever think that's going to happen. So, and that's why rating agencies and bond agencies say, you know, you need to have a good contingency. And if you dip into it 1 year, we're not going to penalize you for it because that's what it was for. But if you don't have a plan in place on what you're going to do to fix that structural deficit, that's when you get dinged in the market. So, right.
Very, very nice point.
Yeah. And, you know, one last,
Go ahead.
yeah. I noticed that there isn't, and like I said, I'm not an expert like you are, and you are in this area, so excuse my, you know, I'm learning, and one of the things I do know is that there isn't a plan in place to pay this unfunded liability in place. Why haven't we done that in the last few years? I know you haven't been here. I guess it's a rhetorical question. It's like, I know that the state requires for us to have something posted that we are paying. I know that it hasn't been updated, which is, I looked it up, and, you know, there has to be some plan posted that we're paying this unfunded liability. But do you suggest that there's a plan in place in the future to pay down this unfunded liability?
Well, I believe that's the purpose of the POBs, is to pay down that liability, because otherwise we really haven't discussed, you know, what other options we could use to upfront that liability.
Except, Mayor, if I can.
Yes, go ahead.
The council has discussed it. We've discussed it the last 2 budget years. And they did put aside money. That's where that $4 million came from, because they wanted to come up with a plan on how to pay down the debt. And we were trying to explore what was the best thing. Last year it didn't make sense because you had zero interest that PSPRS earned. And do we want to give them all the money? Well, we're still kind of like, well, they did really good last year, but then usually when you're investing that high and that high of a percentage, you fall. And so that's why we suggested the 115 trust. But I think the council, they adopted a policy. I think that was posted. And the state statute just requires you to adopt a policy. There's nothing in the statute that says if you don't do it, there's a problem. But this council wanted to take care of it. So that's why we're looking at POBs.
Yeah, if I could. I know we're taking care of it, and we've discussed it, but there isn't a plan. I know is it the House Bill 2097 or something that there has to be something posted. I think I looked on the website the last time it was 2019. It hasn't been updated. But one of the things is that, having said that, we have discussed it, like you said, but there's not a plan on the budget, a line item that we're putting in money every year into this unfunded liability?
Well, the last 2 years, there has been a line item that council has voted on. We actually had it in a PSPRS reserve, and then we just put it in contingency and briefed the council that we had this much carrying forward, that we hadn't appropriated, it was still available for PSPRS. And as far as I know, we've met the intent of the statute by the posting, haven't we, Michael?
I believe so.
Yeah.
What we, by not forwarding, additional money to the UAL, what we've done is we've committed to be paying the bills as they come due from the PSPRS. So this year we paid in July,
3.3 or 4, close to 4 million, I don't know, somewhere in there, 3.5 million.
Yeah, 3.5 million. So that is effectively implementing the plan to pay the unfunded liability as it comes due. And so when we have $3.5 million bills year after year after year, what we're trying to do is get a little bit ahead of it by doing this $16 million POB issue. And but we're still going to be paying, a considerable amount of money every year. Nevertheless, it's just it'll be the hope is that after we pay the debt payment on the $16 million and we pay what comes due that year on the UAL, it will be less than what is currently being projected. And that's where this cash flow savings comes from.
And so so it would be reduced, the amount. And that's the hope, right? That's the hope, yeah. Yeah, that's the hope. So one last question, and the reason I'm asking is because, this huge debt is I want the public to know that we care about it, and that we're doing something about it, like you say that you've been doing something about it for the last 2 years. And that you're confident as the city consultant that this is the best decision that we can make.
No, I won't go that far. I'm not saying it's the best decision you can make. It's the best decision you can make with the information we have today.
With what you have right now?
Yes.
Not knowing what the market's going to look
Right.
like or anything like that. You too,
Right.
Michael?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
On those $4 million that we had put aside, is it a benefit to the city to not use that $4 million or not include it in the 16 million, so that would cut down the debt?
Mayor, council member, with the pessimistic forecast, I just would feel more comfortable if the council would decide, let's say you get into the budget season and things are looking better than what we thought, and we don't really feel like the pessimistic scenario is going to happen, you can always go and pay off PSPRs or invest in the 115 fund. So I'm giving you the most flexibility by saying, why don't you leave it in reserve, and then if you want to pay it off, like let's say a year from now, you can still take that money and put it into the 115, which means you have to spend it on PSPRS then.
Thank you. And the other question is, if we go ahead with this plan with a $16 million loan, and what's a bigger risk, going along with this plan or just not doing it?
Well, can I say one thing before you answer? If we just go along with the plan, you're going to pay $69 million at the end of the day. Either way, we're going to be done with this by 2039. And that's the other thing, we're in compliance with the statute, was they said by 2038, they'd like to see you have it paid. Well, we're going to about have it paid. There's just one little payment left on 2039. So I think that the thing is that if all the assumptions come true, there's, $6 million of savings that you could make off of doing the POBs. But I'll let you answer it. I think that covers it. Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Councilman.
In the past, I know Council Member Montiel is concerned about the risk, but it is safe to say that based on I know that we had a weird year that what was it, 23%? I know that probably we're not going to get that ever again, but I think that if we focus on a target, which is 7%, right? At least 7%.
7.3 is
7.3,
Yeah.
we should be okay as far as not falling apart, which, and plus we're paying half. So the payments that we will be making will be based on half already, right, of what's left over.
Perhaps even a little bit less, just
Yes.
upfronting that and reducing the overall liability. But again, that is something that is recalculated every year.
Yeah.
Based on your plans and all the participants in your plans, and then also the earnings rate, so on and so forth.
So, and I understand it's a moving target every year. We don't know how many people are going to retire. That's constantly moving, but we can sort of gauge ourselves, and because of the way the market has moved, and pretty much we know how many people are going to retire in next year or in 2 years from now. Because from what I understand, every time someone retires, we take a chunk from there, right? Am I correct, Mr.? Yes.
Correct.
So, but in essence, all these numbers are now going to be based on half of everything, not the big chunk, not the big meteor, but we're just shooting at a smaller meteor, and we can take care of it probably within a few years instead of waiting out and paying out $69 or $70 million when we can pay it down fairly fast.
Let me restate the last part of it. So, by issuing POBs, we're not going to take care of this in a couple of years, right? I mean,
No, I wish it could be in a couple of years, but
if we issue POBs, this is going to go to 2038, and we won't know whether you won or lost until 2038. I think within the first 5 years, we'll have a good idea as to whether this was a great decision or otherwise.
But we'll still have. I hope we'll have those 4 million in there, and just if there's an emergency, we have a hiccup, we can just throw it in there.
Yes, sir. And again, I've said this a couple times. I know that it seems counterintuitive to go issue debt on which you will pay interest, and then you have cash sitting in your account, and you don't use that. It seems counterintuitive, but again, as Ms. Walker and I have said in different ways, just given the risk, the bet that you're going to take, and given the uncertainty of where the economy may or may not go, that it probably makes sense to just hold on to your cash in the event you need to, move and have some flexibility. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
A couple more questions, Michael. On this audit, I was looking at it. Has the numbers changed from the last audit? I'm sure they have, right?
From the actuarial.
From the actual?
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
They have?
Yes.
A couple million?
Without seeing it.
Just approximately?
Yes, approximate, yes.
So every time, got to deal with this. Got to deal with the debt.
Right. But I would also add, so sometimes those numbers change favorably, sometimes they don't, right? So in the year where PSPRS earned 0%, then the numbers likely went up depending on which, city, county you are. However, the year after, where they made, a very large earnings rate of approximately low 20%, then that reduces your liability, right? And that's without you even contributing more. That's just based on the principal, the corpus.
So there's a host of variables.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, if I can add,
Yeah.
too, they changed the assumptions that PSPRS uses, too. So that was another change in the report on the salary increases, where they are ramping them down. They had the salary increases too high, so that made everybody's costs go up because the salaries were going to go up in the systems. But, as Councilmember said, it's based on your individual actuarial. So how long do they think people are going to live? How long will their spouses live? I mean, there's just a lot of variables.
And also, people are retiring 20 years now. I'm sure that has another variable that contributes to the unfunded liability.
That's what actually.
Councilmember, just if I can address the last thing that Ms.
Yeah,
Walker
go
said,
ahead.
is yes, all of those variables within the plan matter. And do they have an effect to a certain degree? Of course. But I think larger than that, the biggest factor in this whole equation is earnings rate from PSPRS.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one thing. We've had this problem for how many years, Pat?
Well, it's been there all along. It just came to the surface when the legislation came forward, required that. It was 2019, I think it was, where they wanted people to start addressing it. And it was just getting worse and worse. But it starts back where there was investments done by PSPRS that probably weren't the best. And then they took some losses and been trying to make it up. And then depending on how they structure, how much vacation time and stuff can be cashed out towards pension. There were just a lot of variables that happened a lot of years. But when they got serious about, hey, we got to start doing something about this, was about 2019.
Yeah, because I remember in my first administration, we never discussed PSPRS. That was in between 2011 and 2015. Very little was discussed. I can't even remember a council meeting discussing it. And then I come in 2019, and then all of a sudden,
Oh, thank you.
it comes out, you know, and we started discussing it. But have we done the best that we can do from 2019 to now, trying to figure this out?
Oh, let me answer that. I think you've done the best because you're not behind on where you need to be. You've paid your bill every year. Did you pay more interest than you know, could you have saved? We didn't know back a year from now. We didn't know that, whether it was smart to do that or not, to issue POBs. We had to do a lot more due diligence because PSPRS wasn't performing. They hadn't those adjustments to the plan. They hadn't done those adjustments to the plan. But I think that having the discussion every year, putting the money aside, you know, you were educated on what the liability was, why it was going up, and we did lots of presentations on that. I think you've done everything you could do to get to this point, and now this is like, you know, this is the formal plan per se, because
Yes.
it is for at least half of it. You're putting into effect a formal plan.
Yes, because I've had lengthy discussions with Mr. Kissinger and Mr. Massey about this, and you know, and it's, and I remember talking with this when Mr. Varona was in office, Mr. Canesian, and how strongly they talked about it, because it was something that it's hard for us to sit here and not take action on it and then leave this problem for somebody, you know, 10 years from now or 15 years from now trying to figure it out, how they're going to solve this problem, especially when it's take over 30 years to do something, you know. It's kind of like the WIFA loan. You get a WIFA loan and then you find out that you're going to fix all these streets, but then it's going to take you 20 years to pay the loan. So basically, you know, you have to plan for these things, and I think I'm going to support whatever you think is best for us, and what Mr. Massey and what John thinks is best for us, because we need to take a big bite of it. It's going to be a risk, of course. Everything's a risk. I don't dabble in stocks. I have enough problems paying my own bills at home. But one thing I do is I always pay more to the highest bill so that I can keep my credit report high. And I know it works. So if you do that, you'll never reduce your credit report lower than what you expect it to be, you know, every time you check it. So with that, you know, unless anybody else in the council has anything else to say, we should start thinking about putting this together so maybe we can bring it back to the next council meeting. Yes, go
I
ahead.
have Mayor of Good. Michael, in the next council meeting, will you be able to put something together so that it could be kind of friendly, if you will, to read? Because I'm not an expert in the area you guys are in. So that we could, you know, and get it before the meeting, not the day of the meeting, where it kind of just is, everything's written down, the interest and the amount that we're going to be paying and the timeline. And I know there's variables. I know you can't control the market or any of that stuff, but something that we could, you know, have beforehand, before the meeting, please.
Yes, ma'am, and my indirect apologies for you receiving that material so late, but that really was not a function of neither Ms. Walker or myself. We were waiting on your actuary, GovInvest, to provide that information, and we did wait quite a while for that. So, yes, we will do our best to get you that upfront with as much time, and also work with staff to make sure that we're hitting the points that you need to see, that you want to see so that it makes sense to you, we're happy to do that. We want to do that.
And the reason I'm asking is, again, we owe it to the people to be as transparent as we can. People in Nogales need to know what we're going to be doing, what we are going to agree to be doing. And that is the reason I want it to be as transparent as possible. Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am, you're welcome.
Okay, with that, Mr. Kissinger, what do you want, just direction?
So, Mr. Mayor, the agenda is put down for discussion, direction, and possible action. I don't know if would it be prudent to make a motion, have it second and voted on, instructing staff to proceed with bringing back the information to pull the trigger on looking for pension bonds in the amount of $16 million. One of the things is, once we get to $16 million, this is the pressing issue, whether we're going to go out and borrow $16 million. That's why we're here out of a regular council meeting, because it's imperative that if we're going to move, we move quickly. We move now because, so that's that's what we need decided hopefully today. Once we decide, Michael has his marching orders to go out and bring back the resolution on all the information that's needed on the actual bonds. Then we'll be bringing back the resolution in February. Once we receive the $16 million, I think there'll be another discussion that's going to need to happen, whether we're going to give it to PSPRS so they can invest it, or we're going to keep it into our own 115 account, which is possibly a little bit more conservative, but a lot safer bet. So, do you want to go into long shot? You want to bet on the more conservative way? Is basically what we're sharing and asking you. Of course, as with long shots, right, a big payout, but also big losses. So that's why we're bringing it and we're having this discussion, and that's why it's difficult for staff to say, this is a sure bet. There isn't no sure bet. I think after we discussed all our possible options, this is probably the most prudent course of action for the city to take to address the $32 million shortfall. The most prudent. Best is hard to use, right? Yeah. Because we could all be wrong, and we should have borrowed the $32 million and everything would have been great, or we could all be big zeros and say we shouldn't have even borrowed the 16. But when faced with a problem, you have to make a decision and move forward and support each other on that decision, and so that's why we're asking for your support to move forward.
I believe that direction, we don't need a vote right now. I think with direction to proceed with this and then we bring it back when we're really going to have to vote in February for the first time, and then we'll decide the second time around.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I have a question for Mr. Kissinger. Have we applied for that loan and have we been approved for the $16 million?
No, we don't know if we're going to go out and seek to borrow 16, 32, or anywhere in between. Staff is recommending from Mayor and Council to give us the authorization to go seek 16, which is half of the problem. You guys could change it right now and say, no, John, go get 32, or go get 10, whatever, right? Staff's recommendation to you is the 16.
Okay, members of the council, are you all right? Go ahead.
Yes, Mayor. Can you come back with options, Michael? If we do 32, you have this option. If we do 16, you have this option.
So we can do any amount between $1 and $32 million. So staff, Ms. Walker, Ms. Molman, we've all talked about this. And $32 million, and this is more from my part, is going to go on your excise tax credit. So we are going to not necessarily max out your credit, but we're getting up there, right? So I don't think that that's prudent, a wise step. And then we also talked about more some of the lower amounts and, kind of doing a bond deal for less than 10 million. There are a lot of professional costs, so that eats into your interest rate or increases your interest rate. So, I think we're somewhere in between the 10 to 16. Yes, ma'am?
I was just going to add that plus the statute where there's a state statute where if we pay too much, they won't refund it back to us. So if we would sell 32 million and they come back after doing the actuarials and they say, oh, you really only owe 30, you've lost that 2 million, it goes into the system. They can't refund it back to you. So that's another reason we don't want to go all the way up to the amount.
But strongly, I would say I would wish that you would not, put such a burden on your excise tax credit.
Do you feel comfortable with the 16?
That is the general area that I feel most comfortable. Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Okay? Yes, Mayor. Yeah, your direction.
Right.
Mayor and council, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Good job.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.